Hey, good evening, folks, and welcome to a Thursday special edition to Here's the Deal with Shiloh and Marvin. How are you, Marv?
I am doing pretty okay. How are you doing, bud?
I'm doing good. So we had some sunshine out here today. Was out doing some visits out in the field and had a pretty good day.
Good, good.
Mm,
Give me 1 second. I'm running some tech support in the background.
oh, there you go. So tonight we're going to have Trent Loos on, and we're going to be speaking about the CO2 pipelines, and then we're going to visit with him about his letter about President Trump. So at first, we're going to talk about these pipelines. So what do you have for us, Marv?
So before we get into that, um, I just want to say this to everybody that follows us.
Sure.
Oh, please say yes. Awesome. Sorry, we had one live stream that didn't want to go there, boss.
Oh, gotcha.
I am starting to see more and more citizens recording their city councils. And for our rural communities, I don't care if you got a town of 15, I don't care if you've got a town of 5,000, I don't care if you've got a town of 100,000 people. If your city does not have a Facebook page, if they do not stream their council meetings, and you're going every week, create a page, create an event tab, and put that stuff public so that those that can't be there can still see what's said at the meetings. Accountability for our elected officials is something that I don't care if it's a township, a school board, a city commission, your legislators. You have to have the information out there because too often they will sit and fight you to release any sort of documentation, to provide audios for meetings, to provide minutes for meetings, to do any of that stuff. If you share it to our page or you tag me in it, I'll share it to mine. We'll get it out there because people need to know. I mean, I shared Dunn County, I share a couple other ones. I shared your one for Ray last night.
Mm-hmm.
Keep your community informed because obviously we have people around the state that don't want to do that. So that's my 2 cents.
Couldn't agree with you more.
It takes 30 seconds to set up a community page for your community. If you're at every council meeting already, make sure that your battery is charged. Let her buck. I want to see it. So
I agree.
that's my 30-second rant for the night, Shiloh. Sorry.
Sounds good. So, and before we bring Trent on here, there is a rally on the 22nd, Friday
Yep.
the 22nd at 5:30 at the state fairgrounds. It's going to
Okay.
be on the State Fair. I apologize. The
Here, let me pull
Capitol
it up,
grounds in Bismarck. And so there's going to be a rally there that we'd certainly like you guys to show up to if you can. It's at 5:30 on the Capitol grounds on Friday, the September 22nd. So with that, I think we've kept them waiting long enough. I know we got Trent in the studio. Let's bring him on.
Yep.
How are you, Trent? Good evening.
I'm fabulous. I saw you just posted that meeting I was going to talk about tomorrow at the Capitol.
Yeah.
Which I don't think's at the state fairgrounds either.
No.
Unless they moved the state fairgrounds to Bismarck.
Well, let's not give them any ideas, Trent.
Minot does not want to lose the state fairgrounds. Let's be honest. But 3:00 tomorrow, I think everybody should be at the state capitol because what Marvin started out with is actually the most important thing anybody's going to say tonight. I'm here to tell you. Yeah. And that is that we've been talking for a long time about getting involved at the local level. But if you're not doing that now, you're too late. So start showing up. Try to make up for lost time because we can talk all day and night about what Biden does on a daily basis and how Biden economics or whatever he calls it is going to make us prosperous when in fact it's putting us in the hole. But what is happening at the school board and the county commission is costing you more money and creating more of a challenge for your kids and your grandkids than anything happening in Washington, D.C. So now more than ever, and it's funny that you bring it up and not funny at all because we're all in tune with the same kind of music. And that is that at freesoilcoalition.com today, I made a concerted effort that anybody has a county meeting where we need the Minutemen of meetings to show up and have a presence and be heard. The time is now.
I agree.
Absolutely.
And that's some of the reason why I went last night to my city commission meeting. I used to be a part of that board, and I know there's frustrated people in the town. And all I tell them is you guys need to start showing up. That's some of the problem. The last election, we have 850 people in our little town, and it was a struggle to get 100 people to vote. And so if you want change, you guys need to be the change. You need to start showing up. Last night there was more people there than I've ever seen in the 5 years that I've lived up here. And there was 6 people. So does that tell you anything? I hope next time we see 7 to 10 and just build it from there, because that's the only way that we're going to get change is if people start showing up.
I wish we would see more like we did with the mask mandates or even the hate crime ordinance that came through Bismarck. We need to pack these rooms, because when you got an empty commission room, things happen. Like this last week, it sounds like Bismarck donated Keelboat Park to the Fort Abraham Lincoln Foundation. So they donated an estimated $2.2 million worth of public property to a private foundation.
Can't believe it. I can, but.
And I'm still reading on it. I'm looking at it. I've looked at the proposals, but I'm confounded how a public entity gives away public land as an in-kind donation. But I'll find out more about that. We'll do a more discussion about that later. Now, Trent, before we really crack into this, I want you to hear this. There was an opinion letter from 2 of our legislators. One's a senator, one is a representative.
I read it.
You read it. What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, they apparently don't understand the farm economy, because 13% of the United States corn crop is exported to foreign countries. 70+% is fed to livestock and runs through ethanol plants. So a 2% decrease in the price of corn in the past couple of weeks is really actually good for North Dakota as a whole. Secondly, who in their right mind in any elected official or any body is going to talk about how we need to continue to get as much money from the government as we possibly can? If you continue to go to the government for your coffers, and we're talking in this CO2 pipeline business, 17 billion annually, 17 billion with the B annually, that the taxpayers are going to pay to 3 entities for one purpose and one purpose only. That is to monopolize a tremendously valuable commodity. And we're going to allow the taxpayers to fund this in a violation of the Constitution. And the Constitution says that eminent domain can be used for public use. There is nothing that resembles public use in putting CO2 in a pipeline and sending it to Mercer and Oliver counties to bury it.
No,
that is
disposal.
For monopolization. For, in this case, in North Dakota, it's simply for Summit, and that needs to be stopped now. And I have to commend the Oliver County Planning and Zoning, Oliver County Commissioners, and the Public Service Commission, which, by the way, is why everybody needs to show up tomorrow at 3:00 at the state capitol to make sure they continue to understand the gravity of this situation.
Yeah, and like I sent you that link for the article I had written here about the CO2 stuff, and it had that White House special report, and you and I kind of chatted a little bit about that. And like that page 59 is pretty damning when it says that a CO2 pipeline is not something that will benefit a community. And that was a report that Biden had received in 2021. And it's It's nuts because they know it's bad for us.
Mhm.
And it says that carbon markets are not good for local communities. And yet here we are with our governor standing up in Iowa and saying, this is going to go through. And if the farmer that's getting the pipeline proposed doesn't want a great big check, well, I bet you his neighbor does. They pitch it for money, but your article talks about insurance and people being held personally liable for these pipelines. And that's insane. And they're not being told that.
I possess 3 letters, 2 of those from North Dakota, 1 from South Dakota, that landowners have received from their insurance company stating that if they have a CO2 pipeline on their property, they will not have liability coverage from their company. I don't really know what else you need to know about this situation.
And those aren't little insurance companies, are they?
No.
Do you remember which ones right off?
Well, without looking, I know that Farmers Union was one of
Farmers
those.
Union is. So my question to that is are they in cahoots with the government on just another easier way to take the land if something happens and these people get sued and they lose their land? Is that fair to say?
No, the letter specifically said that the pollutants that you have on this property would deem us not to want to insure you. Now, here's where it gets really murky because CO2, as I previously stated, is a tremendously valuable commodity. The problem is that we're compressing CO2 to the tune of about 2,300 pounds per square inch and putting it in a 24-inch pipeline in North Dakota. It's smaller in other states before we get to North Dakota. And we're putting it 4, possibly 6 feet deep. Well, guys, I drilled 5 post holes in the past week, and I could literally have ruptured this pipeline with these post holes that I dug. 4 foot deep is not significant enough to be out of harm's way. And if you look at what CO2 has done where there have been pipeline ruptures, it's significant. And it will be a tremendous danger. And that's one reason why the people who live in Burleigh County, particularly Bismarck, should be very concerned about the original path of this pipeline. And moving it is not the answer. Moving it to Brazil, maybe, but not moving it to 15 miles farther away than it was. More importantly, everybody in the world right now, and this should be dangerous, it should be a cause for everybody to pay attention. Every company wants to market net carbon zero by 2030, net carbon zero by 2035. You, the 3 of us, are 18% carbon. If we're net carbon zero by 2030, that means there are 0 human beings on the planet.
So that's another population control thing is what we're getting to.
It reminds me of the old adage, once bees die, there's 10 years that the world will exist afterwards. And the net carbon zero scares me. The Burleigh County pipeline path, I spoke at the meeting that they had in Bismarck, the last one that they had before they passed it. And I spoke as somebody that grew up on the land that path was crossing. 2 of the sections that it crossed was land that my family ranched. And I wanted to know, amongst other things, had they taken into account that underneath that soil is shifting clay? That you get down far enough, it's shifting clay. And then you don't have to go very far to know that the hills move. And that one of those sections has a valley that runs from where it's at on 97th all the way down to 94, all the way down and across the interstate. And when the fog comes in, if you know that land, that fog will follow that channel all the way down and across the interstate.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell me CO2 with the right wind won't follow that same path.
CO2 will follow the lowest possible point because it's 1.5 times heavier than oxygen. Yep. And in fact, I was Monday in Iowa at a CO2 demonstration, and you can see the CO2 just come, it just settles which, by the way, brings up the real question, is that we're told we need to do this to protect the climate because the climate is warming. Wait a minute. CO2 is a cooling molecule that decreases, it does not rise. So how is it that a cooling molecule that decreases to the Earth's surface is somehow responsible for trapping heat on the planet? Fifth grade science tells you that that is flawed, that that is absolutely wrong.
Well, and if you've read any of the reports from down in Missouri where they had that rupture, like the emergency responders weren't able to get to people fast enough because their vehicles were dying. The CO2 was suffocating the vehicles.
Just a slight modification, Marvin. That was Satarsha, Mississippi.
Sorry.
But you're exactly right. It killed the vehicles. And for the record, one of the uses, one of the value-added uses for CO2 is pork, turkey, and chicken plants are now using it to kill the animals in a very quiet, put them to sleep kind of a way.
That's interesting.
Dakota Provisions, I've been through the plant myself in Huron, uses CO2 as well as many of the pork plants in this country. They put them in a CO2 chamber, they let the CO2 go, and the animals die.
Yeah. So that's fun.
With
self-explanatory.
Yeah. With all the safety precautions and all that, we know the dangers of it. Let's talk about the land rights, though, and the leases, how the leases are written. How is that going to affect a landowner? Because now they're talking eminent domain. So
I'm going to mute for a second, Shiloh. I'll be.
Okay. Well, it's going to affect landowners for multiple generations. I want to share a story of a gentleman that I had a conversation with in Beersford, South Dakota. And Jeb was telling me that his grandfather in the 30s signed an easement and allowed natural gas lines to go across his property. Natural gas is quite different, frankly, than CO2 in a pipeline. And I've never been opposed to any pipeline ever in my life. In fact, I showed up at Standing Rock when that was taking place in support of the pipeline. This is a different beast because of the dangers, the inherent dangers that come along with putting CO2 in a pipeline when, quite frankly, we've never done it before. We've never put it in the earth like they're talking about doing in Oliver and Mercer counties. They just pretend that they know the geology is right to make that happen. They pretend to ignore the fact that we now know that volcanoes are caused by CO2 coming through the Earth's crust and creating an eruption. They pretend to ignore the fact that we put CO2 in a canister in a gas station, put some soft drink in it, sitting on the floor over there, and then they run a line up to a spigot, pull the spigot, and it comes out because the canister has CO2, which is erupting, pushing the soft drink to your glass. That's how it works. That's why CO2 is dangerous in a pipeline. Absolutely essential for many parts of today's life, but in a pipeline, it's extremely dangerous. They want to ignore all of that information and tell us that we're just going to do this and take and bury it. And when I get outside of North Dakota, so many people tell me, well, I know that we need this in the Bakken for enhanced oil recovery. So we know that there is a 15% additional advantage to using CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. But we also know that CO2 combined with natural gas increases the efficiency of the enhanced oil recovery. Most importantly, what most don't seem to be zeroing in on is that if we once put it in a tomb in Oliver or Mercer County, North Dakota, they cannot touch it for 12 years. In 12 years, how many new technologies are going to come along to improve enhanced oil recovery in the Bakken? That's the question that needs to be asked.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, sorry, that's true. I never thought of it that way, I guess.
We had a
so what happens to flood. What's sorry. That?
We had a temporary water flood. What I was going to say, and you already kind of touched on, Trent, but it happened here in Bismarck and got zero press. About 2 months ago, I was headed to work. One of the gas stations I drove by had the fire truck, 2 ambulances, and like 4 or 5 patrol cars there. I figured somebody got into an accident. Well, it's a gas station I frequent, so I had stopped in that night, and I asked the store manager what was going on, and he goes, well, we had a CO2 line for our pop machine break, and 3 of our employees got taken to the hospital this morning in a gas station. Doesn't hit the news. Well, we got the whole summit thing going on. And it's happening. It can happen on such a small scale that hospitalizes 3 people, but they don't talk about it. But we want to run it past our cities. We want to run it past our farms. We don't expect anything bad to happen. Sorry.
Well, there's one other thing, Marvin, that we need to address with the summit situation, and that is that I've been in Iowa, I've been in South Dakota, I've been in North Dakota, I've been on the exact path of the pipeline. It's very clear if you study where the households are, where they chose to go with this proposed pipeline. It's worth noting that there's not one single permitted CO2 pipeline anywhere in our 6-state area.
Yep.
There's five rulings that have denied a CO2 pipeline and storage facility, 0 that have said, yes, we want to do this. But if you look at the summit path, it goes as close as it physically can to homes. If you're trying to be a good neighbor, if you're trying to pave out a way of saying, look, we want to do this and we just want to contribute to what we think we're going to get paid for, why do you try to be an agitator? And they have proven they want to be an agitator, not a good neighbor. That in itself should pose a question.
Just with the videos of lives of people calling the sheriffs to have them removed from the property, because the guys that are out walking and surveying your land, they don't have a court order to be there, folks. They don't have the easements to be there. They can't be on your land without your permission. I watched a video a month and a half ago. A gentleman called the sheriff and wanted to press charges because they, in fact, did not have the approval to be there. He live streamed the entire thing. And they don't care. They just go walking through your yard. They open up your gates. They trespass on your land because somebody higher than them has told them, yes, we have this. You can do what you need to do. And
in that situation you're talking about, Marvin, which was in Burleigh County, by the way, on Tim Keller's place, he wanted to press charges, and the Burleigh County Sheriff came to talk to him and said, you know, they left when you asked them to. We really don't think this is worthy of pressing charges, and they didn't want to be a part of it. They were illegally on their place.
Yeah, and it needs to stop. Like, if they're on your land, you need to be calling them in. They don't have the right to be there. They don't have the judgment to be there. Oh, I hate eminent domain, Trent. I can't tell you how much.
There's one other component that's not getting enough attention, and that is the fact that it takes between 30 and 50% of the electricity produced by these particular entities. Let's just take Coal Creek Station, obviously Rainbow Energy, one of the most preeminent and important coal-fired power plants in this nation. If we lose that coal-fired power plant, we are all in trouble. I'm telling you, that facility is huge. Now, they've received a $38 million grant to put in carbon capture. But what's not getting nearly as much attention is that a full 1/3, 30+% of the energy that Coal Creek produces will be required to put the CO2 in the compressed line. At the end of the day, what are we accomplishing? Green energy? No, the only green involved is the payment that is going to the few companies that are directly involved. And this whole new Green Deal is nothing about changing our energy supplies. It's about restructuring society. I quite frankly don't want to be a part of restructuring society, and will fight it until the death.
I agree with you, Trent.
Yeah, 100%.
A lot of it is.
And something like when I was digging, and I've spent a long time on this, like this has been in North Dakota since 2009, folks. I don't know if you saw the other article that I put up, but the two bills that created the century codes that allowed this were passed in 2009. I did an entire article that's up on the website, and there's more to come with that, but you can't tell me that this is some new plan, because it defined the pore spaces, it defined how to capture, how carbon capture would work. The century code is 3822. You can go read it for yourself. It's there. So my question is, why the sudden push, other than the tax credits that the Obama administration started in 2014? Is that when that was proposed, Trent? I can't remember.
So let's just back up a little bit.
Okay.
There has been an 8-inch CO2 pipeline running from Beulah to Saskatchewan since 1999.
Yeah.
That has successfully ran without incident since 1999. They now plan to shut that down because there's more money in sticking it in the ground than taking it to Saskatchewan for enhanced oil recovery. Go figure. If in fact enhanced oil recovery was a great thing, why weren't we doing that from the Beulah plant in 2000 instead of sending it to Saskatchewan?
Yeah.
You're referencing what led to the Century Code, but started in 2008 with George W. Bush, where he put in place the 45Q tax credit for such things as climate initiative programs. Then you had the Century Code come into play, but let's talk about the federal situation. In 2020, a guy named Donald Trump championed the passing of the Use It Act, which was sponsored by Kevin Cramer and John Hoeven, who said, hey, we've got these 45Q tax credits that are sitting out here from the 2008 bill on climate change initiatives. Let's apply the carbon capture to the 45Q tax credits at $50 per metric ton. That occurred in December of 2020. And then the Inflation Reduction Act moved the payments from $50 a metric ton to $85 a metric ton. And that was obviously under the Biden administration. And that's when the win for all took place. And now everybody wants to be a part of it, because at $50, it was kind of okay. At $85 per metric ton, it's going to Vegas and winning the lottery.
It just makes you shake your head and wonder, because in 2009, when the bill passed here, John Hoeven was our governor.
Do the math.
Yep. So on a different note,
there's one other connection that we might make this particular week. Amazon announced that they were going to follow the lead of Microsoft, the two largest companies, who are going to invest in carbon capture, because they see this as a tremendous opportunity to improve their ESG score and make themselves more friendly to the world. So Microsoft made that announcement first, and then Amazon this week made the announcement. Who might we know that has a tie to both Amazon and Microsoft?
Some guy running for president right now, I think.
It is a guy running for president who the other day in Iowa got challenged pretty good, because as we all know, he sold his Great Plains software business to Microsoft, was an executive for Microsoft for 12 years, number one investor, campaign contributor to Doug Burgum's gubernatorial race was none other than Bill Gates. And we now know that Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos have both given Doug Burgum an open checkbook to campaign for president of the United States. Ironically, those injection sites we're talking about are in his state. Ironically, Doug Burgum has a relationship with both of those companies. I'm not perfect at math, but I still think 2 + 2 = 4.
Unless you go to government school.
I didn't study Common Core, Shiloh.
Shoot. No, that's, I don't know. It's
it makes you shake your head. The one thing that kind of killed me a bit about that letter, I questioned you if you asked, is like, both the legislators spent an awful lot of time talking about how long their family's been in North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, I don't know if you've ever toured our steel curtain very long, but like most of us can track our lineage all the way back to where we started from in Germany, the route through Kessel, Odessa, Ukraine, the trip to South Dakota, and then upwards into the Dakotas. So, I mean, if they want to throw that around, technically my family has been here since, I want to say 1887 on my dad's side. And technically, a lot of those descendants helped found a lot of the towns that they're running these pipelines across. So they're really kind of peeing in my backyard. I'm sorry for the lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But it baffles me that they have to go through and prove their lineage to say that, yeah, we're okay with a pipeline. Like, that's insane.
See, this is the one area where I don't really appreciate your stance. Because I've wanted to be a North Dakotan since 1998, and that steel curtain continues to keep me out. So, you know, I'm still just applying for citizenship of North Dakota and continually denied.
Well, when
Kind
you
of
get on the other,
kind of like a Summit pipeline, continually denied.
But see, when you get to the north side of 94, that's all Swede country. So I'm sure Shiloh will take you up in Ray for sure.
Oh,
I
yeah.
wanted to move into Dunn County. I worked hard at getting Gene Harris to find me a ranch in Dunn County for years. I finally gave up on him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's gorgeous country out there. I mean, Badlands, North Dakota is the top of the Bible Belt. We still are God's country. So anytime you want to come up and cruise around the state, you let me know. We'll go have some fun.
Yeah. Well, I get to sneak in like once a month, and I call it a little piece of heaven, but nobody will let me relocate. So that's where the problem lies.
Well, does that go back to the own house, though? Is Mama involved in this decision, too?
No, we actually went and looked at places, Flasher and Sentinel Butte back in the day, about 2000, 2002, but no,
Do you see,
nobody would make it work.
Do you see that there's a couple thousand acres that's going up for auction in Sioux County, I think. Here I shared a few weeks ago. I'll send it to you later. But yeah, it's 1,926 acres.
See, my timing was perfect before. My timing is not so good now. Cows won't pay for it like it would have in 2002.
Yeah, no, I get you.
Marty says you need a white cowboy hat there, Marvin. He says you're one of the good guys in North Dakota.
Marty, I would love to have a cowboy hat, but I don't know if you saw, I kind of have a big melon, and my wife has tried to get me a cowboy hat. We can't find one that fits.
Who's this Marty you speak of?
You should know him, huh?
Marty Beard?
Yeah, it's Marty Beard, yep.
Oh,
I have heard of that guy. I don't think I want to be a part of that.
Shoot, that's funny. So,
well, there's so much to take in on the carbon stuff. It's just insane. I don't know if you caught our Monday show, but something I want to float by you, Trent, because I know you work hard for the people. At the end of our show, I was kind of talking about the grassroots movements and where we run into issues. And it's something that I see coming up time and time again. And it seems like anytime we gain any traction, something happens that fractures the group. Clash of egos, clash of personalities, whatever. And that's any group or any movement. You see these fractures, these splinter cells. What would you see as kind of that lightning rod, that rally point where we could get everybody together on something versus continuously infighting each other?
Hunger.
Because that's the biggest. I'm sorry. It's personally for me, it's my biggest concern for any sort of conservative movement or any sort of return to a constitution movement is getting everybody on the same page.
I agree 100%. And I've been dealing with that for 23 years in public life. I can't tell you how many states. I maybe one of the most vivid in my mind was in Michigan. One day it was in Michigan, and this would have been in about 2003. And we were talking about virtually the same issues. It just wasn't CO2 pipeline. It's issues that remove our rights that God gave us and the Constitution is supposed to protect. And every time I remember this one day, we had like 28 people sitting around a table, and we would all identify problems. And then before we would get around the entire table, there would be 2 or 3 groups that would say, well, we're already doing this. I'm like, if we're already doing this, why are we having this meeting? And every time the meeting and the movement is destroyed because there becomes a turf war, there becomes an ego boost for one entity over the greater good. So I've come back to the answer that I gave you in one word: hunger. Until people are hungry, until people can't find the essentials of life, until the electricity doesn't come on, and we all of a sudden wake up and say, wait a minute, we have 800 years left of coal in this country. Lignite is doing a phenomenal job producing electricity. Why aren't the lights on? Well, because you did not actively engage when we were erroneously decommissioning these coal-fired power plants to produce the most affordable, effective supply of electricity that we can come up with. You sat back quietly while that was happening. So until we get to the point where people cannot turn the lights on or cannot find the next morsel of food, we will continue to deal with these splintering groups.
You know, and that's something that, because I'm from Mercer County. I was born and raised in Mercer County near Hazen. And, you know, I would have thought that they would have learned when they closed the second plant down in Stanton. And, you know, it just seems like people just don't learn. Take, for instance, you know, like the Oliver County, the zoning and planning. You know darn well that they would have passed it if those people wouldn't have showed up. And there was only, you know, the room was full, which was good. I'm glad that they had the turnout that they did. But you know darn well that they were going to pass it if the people didn't show up. And I'm interested to see what happens in Mercer County, because I was just back last weekend in Hazen, and they had their Harvest Fest, and I was out visiting with some people, and they're seeing dollar signs. They're not seeing the whole picture.
Particularly those related to Wade Beauchamp.
Mm-hmm.
What? People have to hurt first. They have to feel the pressure. Mindy just put up here.
That's Mindy.
And it's sad because
you got comments coming in. I just looked at that. I didn't know that y'all had this high-tech world going on here.
Oh yeah, we got it rolling. I should probably check my own Facebook page.
See, I just you know, talk on the radio.
Yeah.
Can't have all this feedback and stuff.
Well,
although we had a great K-Fire Cafe today. We had covered a ton of topics today with our callers.
All right. Yeah, it's been a work in progress to get where we're going here. 3 weeks, 4 weeks now, we've been hammering on the website, getting all the stuff set up. I guess my biggest thing that I have to say when it comes to the groups and everything else is, like, we have to be open and honest in public. We have to be willing to have conversations. We can't be like these groups that are already doing what they're doing, where they do everything behind closed doors and secret meetings. If
they already know we're coming, it's not a secret.
They already know we're coming. They know we're showing up at district meetings. They know we're showing up at these conferences. They know that we're going to be there. So why do we need to hide about it? Like, let's be in their face. Let's make it uncomfortable. Let's hold our elected representatives accountable. And it's 20 years of being complacent that got us to this. You know, we're a red state. We hire conservative legislators. We vote with an R. But when was the last time you talked about politics at Thanksgiving or Christmas, folks? up until 3 years ago, I bet you it was one of those subjects that just didn't happen. You didn't talk about religion, you didn't talk about politics, and now we need to discuss both because there's a whole lot of God missing, and we need to be involved in our politics.
They go hand in hand.
Yep.
Clearly, the red has become quite purple, Marvin.
Yeah. You don't need to tell me, Trent. We've had great conversations about that stuff, haven't we? Oh, if we, I don't know if you saw real quick before we get into the next section. Remember all those audio recordings I had sent you from Cass County?
Yeah, I do. I followed up on those.
So I went and spoke at Senator Magram's bills up at the Capitol, and I went over those audios and affidavits and stuff at the Senate hearings for these bills. What was really interesting to me, and if you go listen to them, once I find the links, we'll get them added, but I had a senator sitting there admitting that the actions that we're taking were breaking the law, and yet we didn't see any sort of election reform come out of it. So it's I couldn't play the recordings, but I read the transcripts, and you just have them sitting there shaking their head and saying, well, that was breaking the law. It's like, yes, so let's do something about it. So I just figured I would give you the follow-up that actually got read in committee hearing.
We all know that 2020 there were serious election integrity issues. I'm now convinced, Shiloh, after the meeting you and I attended in Springfield, that didn't start in 2020. That's been going on for quite some time. In fact, we watch a guy speak, and talk that he wrote the algorithms to change the election criteria in the early 2000s. And so you have to ask yourself, how long have we had selection instead of election?
Yeah. Yep. It was mind blowing. I sat through some of that, and obviously I was in the back a lot too. And it's I don't know. It really makes you think after you've seen everything. So,
well, and something I want to point out, because people have short memories when it comes to the elections. The Democrats in the year 2000 lost their minds when George Bush got elected because of hanging chads in Florida. But now that the Republicans are pushing and talking about it and talking about what happened with the election, now we're the conspiracy theorists. It's ironic that 20 years we have a complete swing in party momentum in election. And I don't have one thing to say one way or the other when it comes to the 2000 elections, but I do know that because of what happened there, we had the creation of the Help America Vote Act under President Bush, which is part of the Federal Election Commission, which is why many states have moved to a voter registration. But even with our own Secretary of State's office coming into the 2022 primary, the day before the listed voters was in the 300 some thousands on the state site, and the day of in the morning, I don't have the screenshot of the morning, but spiked to the population of the state. And then towards the end of the day, the amount of eligible voters dropped back down to 564,000 people. I do have a screenshot of that. And my curiosity of it is the DMV and the Department of Vital Records in North Dakota provides the Secretary of State's office with the list of eligible voters, giving a 30-day window to that. That should have been a set number to begin with, don't you think? But yet our state totals sat and populated and fluctuated so much. And even when I reached out to the auditors after the primary election, the ones that did respond to me, population-wise, it didn't really make sense, the amount of absentee ballots versus the amount of eligible voters versus the census for certain counties. So when I was campaigning, the question that I would ask was, do you believe that there was election issues in 2020? And then even if one hand came up, that was my point. Like, if there is even a shadow of a doubt, it needs to be addressed. If one person in a room of 1,000 people raises their hand, that's still one person that's going to question it for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
What
What did
that brings us into the conversation about President Trump, though, too, because that was 2020 was a year that none of us will ever forget.
I actually question 2000 now. The whole hanging Chad thing doesn't make any sense to me now that we look back upon it. Obviously, I thought that was a great end result. But I think that we've been dealing with this situation much longer than 2020. And I was sitting in Springfield and I saw all of this stuff alluding to and not alluding to, point blank showing how election integrity has been an issue much longer than any of us realized, 20 plus years. So I started asking myself the question, how is it that Trump beat Hillary? If in fact we have selection, not election, how did Trump beat Hillary in 2016? As I remember exactly where I was sitting, probably about 9:20 at night, when they came on television and announced that Florida had just gone to Donald Trump and this could be a game changer. And everybody was shocked. And if you remember, it was about 10:20 at night Eastern time when that took place. We know, we absolutely know that the election was stolen after the polls closed and after the voting was supposed to be done in 2020. Why was it so late in 2016? So I started digging. In fact, I asked people in Springfield at this election integrity conference, I said, how is it that Donald Trump beat Hillary in 2016? Well, thanks to Israel. What does that mean? Thanks to Israel. Well, it turns out that Israel has the Mossad. I'm not talking about the biblical portion of Israel. The Mossad has this Team George, which their sole purpose is to go around the world and influence elections to the way they want them to be. And then I realized that everything that was going on with a Russian interference was a distraction from the people who really rigged the election in 2016, and that was Israel. So then I started digging deeper, and it turns out, and I could go back as far as you like, I can go back to John D. Rockefeller in the 1800s, or I think I'll just go to 1985, when Donald Trump files for bankruptcy in New York City or Atlantic City, actually, with one of his casinos. And the word of the day was that that was not a personal bankruptcy. If you'll remember, that was a one casino, one property. But the word of the day was that this could lead to the bankruptcy of Donald Trump, his entire wealth, which was acquired by his grandfather, Frederick Trump, with prostitution in a place where gold mining was taking place with John D. Rockefeller. So Donald Trump was having trouble finding somebody to help him through this bankruptcy. And then he stumbled upon Wilbur Ross. And Wilbur Ross specialized in this type of bankruptcy that really didn't look like it had much of a chance. And it's been reported that Wilbur Ross literally saved the Trump wealth. Well, Wilbur Ross was an appointee into the Trump administration after the election of 2016. He was appointed the Secretary of Commerce. Who did Wilbur Ross work his entire life for? The Rothschilds, German Jews. And so I started putting two and two together. And here's something that I have not shared publicly, guys, but I'll share it here, is that you may or may not know that I'm currently on the board of America's Frontline Doctors. America's Frontline Doctors was supposedly founded by Simone Gold, a Jewish doctor, a medical doctor and attorney. And when I got to looking at the finances of America's Frontline Doctors, there's $30 million plus that came into this organization from Israel. And not only did the money come from Israel, when I got on the board, the public relations was still being done by an entity in Israel. That was very problematic. When you think about the fact that America's Frontline Doctors was born from the restrictions being placed on COVID and mandates and mask, jab mandates, and wearing a mask, and all of these other things that Simone Gold and all of these doctors lined up in front of the Capitol in their white lab coats, their doctor's coats, and they were standing for body sovereignty. They're standing for medical freedom. And then I learned that the majority of the money that came into this organization came from Israel, a place that had the least amount of body sovereignty, the least amount of personal choice in what you put in your body during the COVID. And I was like, how does this all work? How does this come together? And then I began putting two and two together. And still to this day, as recently as yesterday, Donald Trump is on with Megyn Kelly bragging about Operation Warp Speed, which was unprecedented in bringing a theoretical biologic to the marketplace without the degree of testing and verification that it's, number one, safe, and number two, that it works. He's still bragging about that, despite the fact that even the CDC is talking about a significant increase, and particularly the people, 70% of the people who are having vaccine injuries today are vaccine injuries from the jab of COVID and what happened as a result of Operation Warp Speed. All of this started just putting pieces together, and then I start looking back into my own involvement with the Trump Ag Advisory Committee, which I would send Sonny Perdue to talk to Donald Trump as president when I was on that committee, because he passed and championed the most aggressive animal rights bill. He actually championed an animal rights bill that made it a greater federal penalty to abuse your dog than your kid. And I sent Sonny Perdue. I said, Sonny, you got to go talk to this guy because he doesn't understand the world community that put him in this office. And Sonny talked to him 3 times about this and said, Trent, this is the one thing that he just won't listen to me on. I start putting two together, and I say, this guy's not working for us. He's working against us. And he's been a plant to be in this position to generate all this momentum and all this rally that he's the guy that's going to fix this, when in fact, I believe, my personal belief is that he's the guy that's going to take us down.
I'm just looking for something quick.
With that being said, where do we go then?
Here's the problem. Here's where I go. We've all put too much emphasis on who the president of the United States is. This document that I pack in my pocket every single day, called the United States Constitution, says that what's happening in Dunn County, what's happening in Stark County, is a greater, Oliver County, pick your county, is a greater of importance than what's happening in Washington, D.C. And yet we've allowed everything to happen in the reverse course. And what happens in that school board meeting, what happens in that county commissioner meeting, has a greater impact on your ability to have a business or to have a lifestyle that you can pass to your kid or your grandkid. We don't pay attention to that. You already told me 6 people showed up, Shiloh. 6.
Yep.
That's the problem. We're so focused on this federal election that we're distracted from where we can really make an impact and protect our kids and our grandkids.
So it's pretty well known, Trent, that I don't talk about something if I can't prove it. So you hit on an interesting thing with the vaccine there. I'm going to steal the screen for a minute. I want people to pay attention to the date on this. You can search it yourself. It's a pain to find. But if you search EPR vaccination management plan, this will pull up from a North Dakota state website. As you can see, it's Health and Human Services, North Dakota. This has been on our books, if you look in that bottom right corner, since May 6th of 2014. This is the breakdown for everything that happened in 2020. Literally, they pretty much copy and pasted it. If vaccine for mass vaccination arrives during the first wave, rapid administration of the vaccine not possible in the face of high absenteeism among public health and healthcare staff. So, like, they tell how to do the masks, they illustrate how to the vaccine preparedness. They redacted their vendors, obviously, but when you get way down to the bottom, and this is just the feed on what you're already talking about, you know, they shotgunned the vaccine through in what, 9 months for Operation Warp Speed? But when you get down to the way at bottom, here's your prioritization. Who gets it, what order they get it, doctors, housekeeping, physicians, social workers. Like, it's not something new, folks.
The date on that's interesting, Marvin, because I have I'll call it a war game, for lack of a better term. There was a simulation that took place in 2015 that I can forward to you that gave the scenario of a pandemic. If we had a global viral pandemic, what would happen in the world? And what they predicted would happen in 2015 is exactly what took place in 2021, 2022. It was all planned out. And that, by the way, was hosted and put on by global entities in the food business.
So when it comes to Operation Warp Speed, I mean, I can agree with you because obviously I've found that in North Dakota, it's been on our books for a lot longer than the whole, whatever they called it, the North Dakota Restart Program or whatever the heck it was, a bunch of garbage. But it's amazing how much our state got taken over just with executive orders, how much our country got shut down with executive orders. And so, like, when you question the whole vaccine management stuff, it's there, folks. It's on our government websites.
Correct.
And it's not even there. You can follow that one all the way to Washington, back to 2006.
So what would you say to someone who says, we have, in Donald Trump, we have someone who started a movement, who started this grassroots movement, however you want to say that, when he first ran in 2016, he's the guy that they say brought all the eyeballs that have come so far, and different things. He didn't have a lot of help when he was in there, but yet he did a few good things, and I'm not saying that he's perfect, but I was a Donald Trump supporter, and to this point, until he proves me wrong, I still right now think that out of the choices that we have, he is the best choice that we have. Trent, I get what you're saying about getting people involved in the lower levels. 100%. I totally agree with you. But what would you say to someone who says, what about all that he's done starting this movement, whether we want to give him all the credit or not?
Did he do? What did he do for us?
What did he do?
Correct.
Well, he lowered taxes for the middle class, didn't he?
What are taxes today?
Well,
higher than they've ever been.
Yeah.
He grew government at an unprecedented rate for any administration. He ran on the promise of getting rid of the swamp, and the swamp got bigger under Donald Trump. It's bigger now under whoever's taking care of what we're doing now. He did do one thing, and I give him full credit for this. He put the right people on the Supreme Court when he was given the opportunity. Aside from that, I can't name one positive thing that Donald Trump did that had any lasting power whatsoever.
Okay. Fair enough.
My bigger question that I ask people, whether you believe in Trump or not, what if he actually ends up in jail? What's our plan then? If in the next 6 months the court indictments follow through and they find some way to send him to Club Fed, those people on your debate stage, 3 weeks ago? That's your choices, folks. Like, who do you choose? Where do you go?
My choice is easy, Ryan Binkley, but he was not on that debate stage last time, and I don't know if he'll be on that debate stage next week. He has until September 25th to prove himself. But I also believe, Marvin, that the indictments are all part of the plan. And the plan, as I can clearly see now, is to create chaos and to incite a civil war so that every time they do something to Donald Trump, the masses rise up and say, no, you're not doing that. He's our best chance. And I'm not playing that game. I can see through that pretty clearly.
Well, it's like every magician. You don't watch this hand, you watch the one that's behind their back.
Correct.
But we've seen Mockingbird media in play. And again, not conspiracy. Mockingbird media was designed in the late 1960s by the CIA. It was reported in the Thomas Church Report. Interestingly, who was spearheading the CIA during the development was George Bush, the senior. Thomas Church Report was reported in 1975 to the Senate, I believe, and was full disclosure about how they would use student groups to affect and repeat the same information and spread it nationally. And we saw it live streamed 2020. Didn't matter what news channel you were on, you could flip through and the same conversation was being had over and over and over again. So we saw that usage, and it's still in play now, because now everything's getting talked about on a national scale about Trump, very little about what's going on with the other presidential candidates, and absolutely zero about what's going on with anything of importance. Carbon captures, Hawaii. We had Sheila Walker on from Hawaii on Monday. Like, they use that big distraction for everything else. And it's proven, and it's an existing program.
Sheila's a great example because she's been beat up for trying to be a solution provider, as I'm sure you shared, as she joined you this week after what happened to her last week.
Yeah.
Let me tell you a story about Ryan Binkley that kind of explains what's taking place here. 2 weeks ago, Fox and Friends, it's now 3 weeks ago because it's been a full week since this took place. 3 weeks ago, Fox and Friends had organized an event in West Des Moines, Iowa, Clive to be exact, that would take place at the Machine Shed. And some people may have watched early morning Fox and Friends from the Machine Shed. And Ryan Binkley, presidential candidate, was to be a guest on their program. On Wednesday, prior to that particular event, Ryan Binkley, thanks to my help, came out very strongly anti-CO2 pipeline, anti-eminent domain. On Thursday afternoon, the morning before he's to join them on Fox and Friends Friday morning, they called to inform him that they no longer had time for him on their program. That quickly, they just turned him off and said, if you're going to talk about something we don't authorize, you don't come on our program.
Yeah, and on a state level, we were seeing that here. My Secretary of State run for the primary against Michael Howe, like, we had to fight to get airtime on Scott Hennon, who was toting Mike Lindell stuff on every chance he could get. We had to fight for 5 minutes on the show with him.
Yeah, I believe it.
And yet Al was on, I want to say 5 or 6 times leading into the primary, talking about how we have the safest and most secure elections. I can't remember how long Michael had on there, but it's like, because I didn't announce before the convention or in time for the convention, like, even though I was talking about everything uncomfortable that nobody else wanted to talk about, they didn't want to have me on. And so, like, where you're talking about with Ryan here, I mean, 100% it happens. If you come out against anything that the company feels is against their agenda, you don't see that airtime. You don't get that airtime. You don't get that engagement.
Think about that, Marvin. We're at a time, and you started this off so well, It's not a time we should comply. It's a time that we stand up for what is right. And the one guy who stood up for what is right, quite frankly, Bobby Kennedy is as a zealot against CO2 pipelines and standing up for medical freedom and body sovereignty as much as Ryan Binkley. Those two guys don't get time. So anybody who does not comply doesn't get time. So consequently, we're looking at a field that we're trying to pick who the right person is from those that have already complied.
What would you think if Bobby and Ryan got together to run together?
That would be very interesting.
It'd be really interesting to see both sides of the aisle working together.
It would.
Yeah.
But
I got a comment that I want to read here for Trent. It's from Gerald Gorick. He says about President Trump. He kept the world in order and had great trade agreements and had border security and the largest military.
So I was directly involved in trade agreements. The China trade agreement was fantastic. What it took to get to that point, you're ignoring the payments that went to farmers for doing nothing other than to shut them up. Yeah. That particular payment that farmers got is one of the most damning things that happened during presidency in my mind. You're talking about less government and more conservation, and yet he sent out a payment just to shut people up because he pulled out a trans-Pacific partnership, and people didn't think that he should. Stand up and do the right thing. Don't send out a big check. I can't argue that it was a time of very calm world relations. I am fully convinced that at this point in time, that was all part of the plan. We know that we're working against a global entity in this case. Your governor is best friends with a global elitist that's trying to control the world. Yeah. And we have all these individuals who are working together. And quite frankly, we tend to forget that Donald Trump was best friends with the Clintons and business partners with Jeffrey Epstein before he became the most conservative person in America. How does that happen? And one day when I had a real wake-up call, I was walking through how Zelensky and the Ukraine was groomed for his position, because I assume people know this, that he was an actor, that he was a bona fide actor and entertainer. And don't even go searching some of the songs he sings online, because you'll be repulsed and never watch another YouTube video again. Obviously, I only know that because I did it mistakenly. But he was in a role acting as president of the Ukraine on a television show for a made-up party that then rolled into the actual party itself and became the next leader of the Ukraine. And there was tremendous U.S. intervention in getting that done. And we don't have time to go into all of that now. And I was walking somebody through that. I said, well, he was groomed to be in that position. He was an actor and he was playing a president of the Ukraine on television before he became president. And somebody looked at me and they said, oh, you mean like Donald Trump with "you're fired"? We were programmed to believe that he was going to eliminate the swamp because he went to Hollywood and did a TV program talking about "you're fired," except he forgot to fire people. The swamp still exists, bigger than it's ever been.
That's hard to argue. It's hard to argue.
I don't know about you guys. I'm enjoying the kind of like the pause of silence just for that moment of reflection, because like there's so many things you can tie together and so many things that are attached to it. I mean, the World Seed Vault, but Gates is the largest landowner in the country.
He's 51st in the United States.
Yeah, something like that, but he owns ridiculous amounts of land.
2.5 million acres.
You look at the Facebook interference with elections, where Zuckerberg dumped millions of dollars into helping with elections around the country. The group that started ranked choice voting was another Facebook executive. So ranked choice voting, for those of you that don't know, started in Fargo, North Dakota, and 2018 is when it was passed. The first election that was used in was 2020. Now it is becoming a national conversation. I have one question for you, Trent, here. I've heard it said multiple times that the 2024 is the AI election. What do you think on that?
I can't argue with that. I can see the logic behind that. I have no documentation to verify that.
Well, and I've been reflecting on it more and more, because now what the Senate's scrambling on what to do with AI, or our national Congress is trying to decide what to do with AI. In North Dakota, the personhood bill that Representative Christensen brought forward got fought tooth and nail to define a person, you know, and it's like, you think about it, in 2020, I had reached out to the Secretary of State's office, and one of the Bryans up there had told me that they wanted to eventually be to mobile voting, to using blockchain voting.
Mm-hmm.
You can vote off this thing no matter where you're at in the state or the country.
Or the world.
Or the world.
Oh, and by the way, they can change that vote as you're sending it, and you won't even know.
And my question is, I don't know about you, but I know I've gotten a call from my wife on my phone saying that my car's extended warranty's expired. Like, if they can spoof your phone number, they can spoof your vote. And blockchain voting isn't an answer. So this whole AI thing has been 2-3 months now. I've been hearing it, and now watching Congress scramble about it. We got to go back to hand counts and paper ballots, and
we absolutely must.
And to have a president stand on the national stage and say, we are eliminating the machines, or candidates say that they're eliminating the machines, they're going back to paper, they're going back to local precincts instead of people having to travel 100 miles around to go vote, that's who I'd vote for. I don't care what the letter is behind their name. You eliminate these machines, you put the power back to the people, you go back to hand counts and paper ballots and true reporting that's open and honest. Let's have it. You got my vote.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I got chores to do.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I know. I choose this.
We appreciate your time. We appreciate
My
your
pleasure.
time, Trent.
Good to see you.
So, good to see you. Good to see you, and we'll be in touch, and we'll have to do this again.
Sounds good. You got my number.
I certainly do. I told my daughter she can go and stay with you for a while. She's all for it.
Okay.
I told her.
Is she good at riding horses? We got a lot of horses that need to be ridden, because I'm never here to do it.
Yeah, she loves that. So.
Oh, don't say that, Trent. My daughter asked me the other day if she could get a horse.
Yeah, I'll bring one up. If I can bring a horse, turns out I can be there next Friday for your meeting.
Any parting words for everybody, Trent?
No, just like I do every day. God bless the veterans and the farmers who feed us. We couldn't do any of this without the veterans and the first responders that have been there for 247 years. They make this country what it is. And that's a country where we have a fighting chance as a representative republic.
Well, Trent, thank you for everything you do. Like, I always look forward to catching you when you come into town if I'm free. So it's awesome, even just to sit in the back room and watch you talk.
Thank you.
Sounds
My
like
pleasure.
You're gonna have to be free next Friday when he brings you a horse.
Don't you say that, it's gonna end up at your place, Shiloh.
All right, thanks.
Sorry, mad at me about asking about chickens. What do you think they're gonna do if I ask about a horse?
Oh, chickens are easy.
Yeah, tell that to the Bismarck City Council.
Yeah. All right.
We'll see you guys. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Have a good one.
Trent Loos, everybody. That was fun. I don't know what to say. I think I'm still gonna stand by and see what happens, and I'm always open to a conversation, but I've been a Trump supporter for a long time. I thought he should have ran back when Obama ran, and it's just, I'll just say this: I have a lot of respect for Trent. I hope he's wrong. So, but I do agree with him on the fact that we probably need to spend less time worried about what's going on in Washington and get our own states from the ground up going, because we're just not involved right now. I mean, you can pick any city commission that you want to go to, and they're just not there. So I think that's where we need to start with our city commissions, obviously our school boards and county commissions. So
Well, and one thing I've always said, Shiloh, we can't fix the White House if we can't fix our own house.
yeah,
And we need to start having awkward conversations, folks. Uncomfortable conversations. Because if we don't understand each other, we don't communicate with each other, we don't thrive as a community.
right. And I'll be honest with you, there was some pauses tonight, and it was, it was I don't know if uncomfortable is the right word, but it's like, okay, where do we go from here? So, but it's good to have these conversations. Like I said, I went and did that deal with our own city commission, and I got some text messages and stuff from the board, and that's good. That it's good to have conversations like that. It was peaceful. I explained where I was coming from. They explained where they were coming from. I'm not going to name names or anything, but it was good. It was a good dialogue. We actually, at the end of the conversation, thanked each other for listening and being able to have the conversation. And I do believe that's where it starts. I do believe that's where it starts. So we're at high stakes chess match, and we're the pawns. Yep, I would agree. What's Carrie have to say here? People need to have thick skin and agree to disagree and move on towards the small goal. You know what, Carrie? You're exactly right. In fact, we had a conversation about that a couple days ago. And I'll just say this. I would never take away from anything from what anyone is doing. For me, it's about spreading the message. Marvin, you and I, before you agreed to come on here, we talked at lengths about that, and it's about spreading the message and getting people informed. Yes, they have to make the decisions, but we can do what we can do to get the information out. I think sometimes we just need to swallow our pride as people and not make it about us and make it about the message and the common cause. And I'm just as guilty as the next. I have to step back too and I ask the people around me, Marvin, how many times have I asked you? It's about the message, right? I'm not making it about me, correct? You're going to say something to me if that ever happens.
Well, and same for me. Like, one of the things that I said that I was going to try not to do is talk about my run, but you pointed out that you talk from your experience. And
Yep.
Sarah yells at me constantly for babbling, so I do tend to do that. I'm working on it, folks. But the big thing is we're just trying to present you with the information.
Yeah.
And when it comes back to the thick skin, to Carrie's comment there,
Mm-hmm.
Sarah's absolutely right when she says I probably have the thickest skin of anybody she knows, because personally I don't care what somebody says about me.
Yeah.
My goal in even being involved in this in the first place, folks, is so that my little girl never has to do as an adult what we have spent the last 3 years doing. She should never have to sit and scream and shout at a city commission meeting. She shouldn't have to debate whether or not she's going to mask, or silence her children. We live in America. We live in God's country in North Dakota at the very top of the Bible Belt.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't have to worry about this. We shouldn't. But because we haven't been involved, now we are where we are, and now we need to fix it.
Yep.
Which you have to have thick skin. It is terrifying to stand in front of a room full of people and give your testimony. I walked into a van of diapers in Bismarck when I went and testified on the hate crime ordinance bill. There was screaming, there was shouting, there was people mad at each other. But if you stand on the truth, you got to bury your feelings. And my testimony was literally that the city was lessening the crimes that were already on the books, creating a lower fine for the crimes. I didn't attack the groups. It wasn't about that. It was about the fact that they were adding unprotected classes. It was about the fact that they would have to fix their own ordinances
Yeah.
in order for this hate crime thing to even be legal.
Mm-hmm.
And if you come in and you testify, I don't care if your feet are shaking behind the podium, folks, you're there, you're involved, you're testifying. If it's your personal story, I don't care that you're terrified. You have to tell your story, folks. You have to be able to show up at these commission meetings and tell them how it affects you. Sorry, I'll push my soapbox away.
No, it's exactly true, because that's what I and still do to this point. When I got involved with the Sons of Liberty, that was, I didn't get involved with them right away, but my first thing was is to go to that rally that was in Williston, and that's where I met them. But it also kind of I met the people that kind of shaped me and different things as well. Like Luke, I met all of them there. Luke Simons was there. That's where I met Luke. We all know how close I am with him. Jared Hendricks. Uh, some of the people that are involved with the Sons of Liberty in Williston now. Obviously, I met Gerald and Tim, the founders of the Sons of Liberty, and it's just kind of grown. And case in point, a lot of these grassroots groups, the Sons of Liberty, I mean, they started with just enough to make a board. I mean, I remember when I was going to the meetings and there was 15 of us in a big warehouse. And look how much that's grown in just the 3 short years. So it spreads. I just encourage everybody. I guess where we're going with this is get involved. I mean, pick your battle. There's enough of them. Pick one. I mean, I bounced back in between this election stuff now, and we're kind of getting into this pipeline stuff too. So, with the election stuff, it's just been something that I kind of fell in. I told Luke too. I had a conversation with Luke a few days ago, and if you had asked me 3 years ago, and I think I've said this to you before, Marvin, that I was going to go down and speak and get to meet Mike Lindell and speak at his election summit, not only do that, but to do it in front of 2,000 people in 85 different countries, I'd have laughed. I'd have said, there's no way in heck. But there again, you're talking about the fear of telling your story. Now, I told the story of our group and what we're doing in the state, along with the other grassroots, the efforts of the other grassroots groups around, and even people like you. It's just, this is how we're going to grow this thing. Like Dr. Frank says, he's the Johnny Appleseed of election integrity. Well, we have to be the Johnny Appleseed of getting people to participate in their civic duty. It doesn't matter if you sit and whine and complain and not show up to the meetings or not do anything about it besides sit and whine and and moan. It's just, we need people to get involved, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. But I'll tell you right now, it's no longer a Democrat versus Republican. It's good versus evil. And you're going to have to pick which side you're on.
Absolutely. And involvement, covering all the bases, whether you're testifying or you're starting your own Facebook group just so you can share your meetings. You don't need to be loud like we are. Letters to your city commissions, letter to your county commissioners, just a simple email. Share your story, folks.
Yep.
Share your story, please.
If you guys have suggestions about guests that you guys want to see, I'm sorry, we're going to kind of go in this direction now, Marvin. If you guys have suggestions for guests or topics that you guys would like us to cover, you can see our email address under my name there at HTD. Oh, I guess that's our
That's
website.
the website, but yeah,
but you can get to the contact information through the website if you go to htdpodcastnd.com. By all means, give us your suggestions and your ideas, and we'll see what we can do. So I know on Monday we're going to have Rayla from Massachusetts. She ran for Secretary of State out there, and so we're going to visit with her about what all she went through, not just in her run for Secretary of State, but they closed their schools down and they were fighting about that, and what she had to do with Antifa because she got attacked by Antifa out there in a parade. And it's just I met her actually through Trent when we were down there at the election summit. So that's going to be an exciting interview. And then Steve Friskup is going to be joining us soon. I don't have a date yet for him, but he's been on multiple times. He's my friend from down there at Muleshoe, Texas. He's a horse auctioneer by trade, but he also goes around and is very involved in the 30 by 30 land grab and getting information out about that. And he's also a pastor, and I met him through my uncle. And actually on September 11th, when I mentioned that it's my year anniversary of being saved, I was down there in your hometown of Lair.
Yeah.
And Steve was up there speaking to that men's Bible camp there that they had. And so we're going to visit a little bit about Lair and the significance of Lair, North Dakota, because I think you would be very interested in what he has to say. And then we'll also talk about this 30 by 30. And I mean, that conversation goes in many directions with Steve. If you guys have seen the last two interviews I've done with him, he's a very, very interesting fellow. And we'll ask him about President Trump as well, because he's been in the room a couple times with him. So we'll be talking with him about that as well. So I don't have a date quite yet when he's going to join us.
Something else, Shiloh, for guests. I'm excited about Steve. Like, I finally got around to watching all that stuff he sent me. Guests, if you are a candidate running or looking at running and you want to be on the show to sit and talk with us about your platforms, it's right around the corner for primaries. Get a hold of Shiloh or I. If you're already seated and you want to keep your seat and you're willing to sit down in a chair and get questioned by us, by all means, let's have it.
Yeah. No matter what side you're on.
Yeah. I don't care. Let's have a conversation. I don't feel like being a journalist that sits and blindsides their guests. Let's just sit and talk and find out a little bit about each other.
Yep. I agree. Well, Marvin, with that, we went an hour and a half tonight. Man, we're on a roll.
Yeah, no, I think somebody's still hanging on with us. So for those of you that sat through an hour and a half of me babbling and Trent and everything else, thanks for being on.
Yep,
We appreciate each and every one of you.
We definitely do. Thanks for tuning in tonight on our special edition of Here's the Deal, and we'll be back with you Monday the 18th at 8 p.m. Central with Rayla Campbell from Massachusetts. So,
all right. Well, y'all have a great night, and God bless.
Good night.